All right, if we will stand, we'll say our prayer, and then we'll continue. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God, amen. O heavenly King, comforter, the Spirit of truth, Lord of word present and fillest all things, the treasury of good things and giver of life, come and abide in us, cleanse us from every stain, and save our souls, O good one. Amen. So tonight, this is lecture 20. We're only going to 25, so almost there. Stay on target. Tonight we are, last week we were in the 16th century, the 1500s, talking about the Protestant Reformation, the Renaissance, the arrival of syphilis, possibly in the New World, and slavery, as all being elements of the year 1500 and the beginning of the 1500s, when Martin Luther then emerges and the Protestant Reformation takes off. We'll deal with some of the 1500s, but particularly the 16 and 1700s, the 16th to the 18th century is the time period we're going to talk about. And the part of the world we're going to focus on here, though, is what then becomes the Ottoman Empire. And this is the Middle East, North Africa, the Balkan Peninsula, into what is modern-day Romania, Bulgaria, Hungary, Moldova, up to the borders with Austria. That's what encompasses the Ottoman Empire at different points. But to get to that point, we need to kind of backtrack to the start of Islam and understand how the rise of Islam as a religion also has temporal implications, being also a state or a nation or an empire. But that it wasn't just, there's not just one, in a sense, Islamic empire. And so as a review, Muhammad dies in 632 in the city of Medina, which is in the Arabian Peninsula, which is in modern-day Saudi Arabia. That's where he's from, and that's where he dies, in 632. From 632 to 661 is referred to as the Rashidun Caliphates. These are the first four caliphs, or leaders, of in a sense, the kingdom that Muhammad had established. He wasn't just a religious figure. He establishes a kingdom, a dominion in the Arabian Peninsula. Abu Bakr is the first, Umar the second, Uthman the third, and Ali the fourth. And under Umar, the expansion of Islam is rapid. It's in this time period that Jerusalem is captured by Muslim armies in AD 636. But then what comes after Ali, who is the caliph from 656 to 661, not very long, is what is referred to as the Umayyad Caliphate. So you have Muhammad, the first four caliphs, Jerusalem being conquered, and then the Umayyad Caliphate from 661 to 750. And this begins the period of Arabization of the people that have been conquered by the Arab Muslims, meaning the taking on of Arabic as the language of the people who've been conquered, as well as other cultural elements. And this also, during the Umayyad Caliphate, takes on the form of an imperial form of government, where you have the region controlled by the caliph is governed as an empire. not just as before, kind of tribal communities united under a caliph. But the Umayyad did not really encourage conversion to Islam by the people that they conquered. And one reason put forward for this is that non-Muslims had to pay extra taxes, and we'll come back to that, repeatedly. But so to keep tax revenue high, conversion wasn't something that was encouraged. You also had within the Umayyad Caliphate, you had a class system. Arab Muslims were kind of your first-class citizens. Non-Arab Muslims were the second class. So they were treated, they had a second-class standing. And then kind of everybody else, non-Muslims, as the third, bottom of the class system. The capital for this time period was Damascus. This period is the time when St. John of Damascus, this is the caliphate that he's in a sense working under, because they kept, in a sense, they would conquer an area and they would keep everyone in government positions in their positions. It's kind of just, where the money goes changes. Instead of the Constantinople, now it goes to the caliph of the Umayyad Caliphate. And they were the army, basically, that controlled the region. But they kept the civil structure of government basically the same, and that meant a lot of Christians were in positions of administrative positions in government. Thus, St. John of Damascus is kind of the right hand to the caliph at a point in terms of administrative rule. But then in 750, the Umayyad Caliphate ends, and what takes its place is the Abbasid Caliphate. In part, the Fatimid Caliphate, and the Mamluk Sultanate. As you see, kind of their dates for these three overlap. Two of them last till 1517, but the Mamluk again in 1250, and the Fatimid is 909 to 1171. That's because what was controlled by the Umayyad Caliphate at times is divided. And so the Fatimid is mostly in Egypt, and the Mamluk is more in the Middle East, north of Egypt. Question?
So the words before the caliphate,
Uh-huh.
are those people?
It's the name of the caliphate.
And the caliphate is the ruler?
The caliphate is the structure of government, in a sense. That's how it's referred to. It's
Okay.
not an empire, but a caliphate.
Okay. Got it.
So I didn't look into literally what caliphate or sultanate.
But it's not like the last name of somebody?
No,
Okay.
not the last name. Nor is this it might be the first name of the first ruler. But I didn't check. So the Abbasid Caliphate, its capital at first is in Baghdad between 750 and 1258. But then, after it conquers the Fatimid Caliphate, it moves its capital to Cairo from 1261 to 1517. And in a sense, the territory that it had partly was lost to the Mamluk Sultanate, who came into, in a sense, the northern part of the Middle East, Syria, Palestine, Turkey, and so forth, pushing them out down into North Africa, basically, and further down the Arabian Peninsula. So these were competing with each other. It wasn't just one united caliphate anymore. Under the Abbasid Caliphate, distinction between Arab and non-Arab Muslims diminishes. That distinction begins to disappear. The first and second class citizen distinction begins to diminish and go away. If you're Muslim, you're Muslim. Doesn't matter if you're an Arab or not. And you had more, its capital being in Baghdad originally, there's more Persian influence then, therefore, on Islam than there was before, because Islam arises in the Arabian Peninsula. The Persians are not the same as Arabs. And sometimes we in the West kind of confuse this, kind of thinking of everyone in the Middle East as being one ethnic group. Arabs are distinct from the Arabian Peninsula. If you call a Syrian an Arab, they're not going to be happy with you. They're Syrian. They're not Arabs. Lebanese, the same. They're the descendants of the Phoenicians in their mind. And there is truth to that, in a sense. And those who live in Turkey, right, these ethnically are more Greek, in a sense, in their heritage or their ethnicity, than they definitely would be Arab at all. And of course, Iran is Persian. It's not Arab at all. So what unites them is they're Muslim, their religion. So under the Abbasid Caliphate, that religion being the foremost thing that unites you takes root. And with that, conversion to Islam increases within the empire. The Fatimid Caliphate is in Egypt, Palestine, and North Africa from 909 to 1171. The Mamluk Sultanate ruled Egypt, Palestine, Lebanon, and Syria. So the Mamluks take over the Egyptian territory from the Fatimid, but they also take over part of the Abbasid Caliphate, which was Palestine, Lebanon, and Syria. The Mamluks have much greater intolerance for what we call the dhimmis, meaning us. We're the dhimmis, the dhimmi people. We're the people of the book, meaning the Christians and the Jews. And because you were people of the book, you were protected. You were not to be forced to convert, but you had to pay special tax, and there were other requirements on you, and we'll get into what that is. But the Umayyad, in a sense, are the most tolerant, I would say, of non-Muslims. The Abbasids, less so. And as you kind of go down, it just gets worse. The Mamluks being worse than the Fatimid. Partly, maybe this is because they're the ones in charge when the Crusaders show up in Syria and Palestine. The Crusades caused anti-Christian persecution in the Middle East. Up to this point, Christians had remained in government positions in the Middle East. They were administrators in the government. Muslim middle class began taking these positions from Christians in the Mamluk Sultanate, and dismissal from public service became common. The introduction of distinctive clothing for dhimmis is introduced under the Mamluks, as well as various domestic constraints and destruction of newly built churches. This also marked a cultural decline among Christians, the Mamluk period. Monasticism suffered. Many monasteries in the Middle East disappeared. And if you remember back to our talk on Egypt and the Coptic Christians in Ethiopia and so forth, we covered this period already. And so we won't be dealing much with Egypt tonight, but we'll be dealing more with Palestine, Syria, Lebanon, and Turkey, as well as the Balkans. But the same events that happened in Egypt, the same decline happens in the Middle East. Those monasteries that remained lost control of their land holdings, which was the major source of their income and support, and many were reduced to living off of the charity they received from whoever would, in a sense, give them alms. In the time of Tamerlane being a Turco-Mongol conqueror from the Far East, he's also referred to as called Timur. Christians and Muslims suffered under the invasion of Timur, and that's his lifetime was 1336 to 1405. And this is mostly in modern-day Turkey, Syria, and so forth in the Balkans, that he would have come through ravaging basically everything. The Mamluk persecution of Christians that specifically this specific persecution between 1365 and 1366 financially ruined the Orthodox Church in the Middle East. And this is where we have the first mention in Russian sources then of Middle Eastern bishops going to Russia to ask for alms, which the first time that occurs is in 1371. The response to the Union of Florence, which we've already talked about, of 1439, the Middle Eastern bishops did not attend the Council of Florence. And in 1443, the three Eastern patriarchs gathered in Jerusalem and denounced the union. So there was, there was a uniform rejection of the Union of Florence by the bishops, the patriarchs of Alexandria, Jerusalem, and Antioch. The Vatican archives record a union with Rome of the Eastern patriarchs in the mid-15th century, in the 1400s. But Arabic sources do not confirm the existence of the patriarchs Mark and Joachim, who purportedly signed it. It may be fabricated. Nevertheless, if there was a union, it did not hold, and the promised aid that might have come with such a union never materialized. The Eastern patriarchs continued to look to Moscow for help through the 15th century, into the 16th, the 17th, the 18th, and the 19th century. This would be the case for, as I said, centuries to come. Rome, though, would continue to look to bring Antioch under its authority, as well as Jerusalem, and Constantinople and Alexandria throughout the 16th and 17th centuries. And we'll get to the details of this, but in the 18th century, in the 1700s, the Melkite Greek Catholic Church is established under the authority of Rome in Damascus and in Syria, in Lebanon. But at the same time, Western financial aid did arrive, specifically for the monastery of St. Catherine at Mount Sinai in large quantities, and the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. And this aid came from nobility in Spain, France, and the Holy Roman Empire in the 15th century. But it didn't come with strings attached, like you had to convert or come under. It was given by the kings and the nobility of those kingdoms freely. And so I'm going to read you a section here from a text called Arab Orthodox Christians under the Ottomans, 1516 to 1831. This is a very recent publication. The foreword is written by our own Patriarch John X of Antioch. This is translated into English by Brittany Noble and Samuel Noble. It's written by Konstantin Panchenko. And we have a nice summary here. This is a summary of Christians under the Muslim rule from the 7th to the 16th century. So from the 600s to the 1500s. Our understanding of the dynamics of the development of the Palestinian Orthodox community under the Mamluks is extremely scanty. However, through the fragmentary data provided by the sources, a picture emerges of an acutely deepening crisis in the Middle East, in Middle Eastern Christianity at the turn of the 15th to the 16th century. Under pressure from the Bedouins, the Christian population left Shabak. The Christian quarter of Hebron disappeared. Monasteries died out, including the monastery of St. John the Evangelist by the Jordan, which was turned into a lair of Bedouin bandits. In the late 14th and early 15th centuries, pilgrims counted between 15 and 30 monks at the monastery of Marsaba. But by the end of the 15th century, something of the order of 5 or 6 remained. And at the turn of the 15th to the 16th century, the Lavra had been abandoned by the monks for some time under onslaught from the Bedouins. Pilgrims visiting Sinai in the 14th century spoke of hundreds of inhabitants of the monastery in the monastery of St. Catherine, the most modest figure being between 200 and 240 monks. Whereas in the first half of the 15th century, there were only 50 to 60. And in the second half of the same century, only 30 to 50. Finally, the traveler Arnold von Harf found only 8 people there in 1497. After 1498, any mention of bishops of Sinai disappears for 60 years because the monastery of Mount Sinai is its self-governing, in a sense, autocephalous church, which is its own bishop. The Sultan, Qasun al-Ghawri, ruling at the sunset of the Mamluk era, was indifferent to religious matters, but public opinion in Egypt was hostile to non-Muslim minorities who faced severe discrimination. This situation was exacerbated by the state's financial problems, which authorities tried to resolve partly through an extraordinary taxation of the dhimmis, the people of the book. Portuguese expansion in the Indian Ocean, we talked about the exploration of Western Europeans last time. The Portuguese expansion in the Indian Ocean, which undermined Egypt's foreign trade, caused a hardening of attitudes towards Christians, especially those from the West. In a letter to the Pope of Rome in 1503, the Mamluk Sultan threatened to destroy the Christian holy places of Palestine and Sinai. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre was closed during the years 1511 to 1512. 15 letters sent by Qasun al-Ghawri to the monastery of St. Catherine on Mount Sinai have been preserved. Most of these decrees formally confirm the monastery's traditional privileges, the duty-free delivery of goods through Egyptian ports, the free passage of pilgrims, and the monastery's alms collectors, and the inviolability of the monastery's endowment properties in various parts of the Sultanate. From these documents, however, it can be seen that in times of crisis in the Mamluk state, the authorities were unable to protect from attack remote Metokia, or even the monastery itself, which was captured and sacked by the Bedouins in 1505. The abbot attempted to persuade the Bedouins to return the stolen property, but they killed him. And so far as we can determine, the authorities failed to punish those responsible. The reason for this decline of the Orthodox East are not entirely clear. A number of explanations can be put forward, from the general environmental crisis in the region of Syria and Palestine to the establishment of Portuguese hegemony over the South Seas. Naturally, not only did the crisis affect Orthodox, but also by the end of the 15th century, only one monk was left in each of the enormous Coptic monasteries. And Nestorian monasteries had disappeared completely. In the last third of the 15th and the beginning of the 16th centuries, the Mamluk state experienced a severe decline and clearly was losing in the conflict with its nomadic periphery. Another important factor is that around the turn of the century, there was a certain disorganization in the ecclesiastical and social structures of the Arab Christian world, and its acute weakening. As a result, the ecclesio-political vacuum was filled by immigrants from the more viable Orthodox communities of the Balkans. In 1504, Serbs populated the monastery of Marsaba. At the turn of the 15th to the 16th century, with amazing synchronicity, the Greeks gained control of the Patriarchate of Alexandria and of the monastery of Sinai, and then later the Church of Jerusalem. The blows suffered by the Middle Eastern Orthodox churches during the first 900 years of Muslim rule led to a significant reduction in their flocks, their territory, and the number of their dioceses. This waning of ecclesiastical structures affected the Patriarchate of Alexandria most of all. For the entire period, from the 7th through the 15th centuries, we know the names of a few more than a dozen diocesan bishops. The sources from the 9th through the 13th centuries mention around 6 diocesan sees. The number of dioceses constantly decreased. In the 9th century, there were about 3. In the 14th century, no more than 2. By the 15th century, all but one had disappeared apart from the patriarchal see. So there's the patriarch and one bishop in the Patriarchate of Alexandria. That's separate from the Coptic Church. The consecration of the Patriarch of Alexandria came to be performed by neighboring Eastern patriarchs outside of Egypt because there were not enough bishops in Egypt itself. The Orthodox population in Egypt was small and continued to decline from around 300,000 people at the time of the Arab conquest of Egypt. About 5% of the total population of Egyptian Christians, the Melkite community, meaning the Orthodox community, decreased to around 90,000 by the beginning of the 13th century, to just a few thousand in the Ottoman period in Alexandria. So, not very exciting. Yes?
Just a couple questions. Does it say how the Greeks ended up taking over those? Did they just send a whole bunch of people, or was it a monetary thing?
I think I would guess, I don't know exactly, but I would guess because of the disorganization and in a sense the chaos brought about by the Mamluk oppression, basically. In a sense, outside help was somewhat needed and accepted. You didn't have any monks in Marsaba, so the Serbs came to take care of the place. I don't think it was intended as a power grab or anything like that, right? But it was just because of the decline of the Christian community, in a sense that outsiders were welcomed into, in a sense, help hold things together. That would be my initial kind of understanding of what initially happened.
So one of the Arab surrounding that was closing those or forbidding people to be there as monks, or
well, it's just the pressure from the Islamic government, right, upon the Christian community was causing the decline in the population. And so therefore, in a sense, you had vacancies. And so Christians from outside that area could come in to fill those vacancies, whether it be monks or bishops or priests, right? So I think that's how it occurs. Any other questions? That just takes us to the 1500s. And the end of the Mamluk Sultanate in 1517, which coincides with the starting of the Protestant Reformation by happenstance. And it's the Ottoman Empire then, which begins in 1299, but in terms of the area that we're talking about, it's in the 1500s that the Ottomans very much have already taken Constantinople and parts of the Balkans and Turkey, but then also come down into Syria, Lebanon, and Palestine, what we think of as those places, and in a sense take control of those territories. And that's the area that we're talking about tonight. The Patriarchate of Antioch, the Patriarchate of Constantinople, the Patriarchate of Jerusalem. And we've already, in our talk about this, the Balkan Peninsula, we've talked about the state of the Serbian church, the Bulgarian church already. But they would be included because those lands were conquered by the Ottomans as well in this time period. And we'll touch on them slightly, but we'll mostly talk about Constantinople, Antioch, and Jerusalem. So by 1566, the Ottomans controlled most of North Africa, Palestine, the west coast of the Arabian Peninsula, the Balkan Peninsula, Turkey, Iraq, Kuwait, Armenia, Georgia, Hungary, and Wallachia, which is basically what becomes modern-day Romania, as well as Moldova, are vassals of the Ottoman Empire. They're slightly independent, but they pay homage to the Sultan and have to follow, in a sense, or under his kind of influence. By 1739, Hungary will regain its independence, but Wallachia and Moldova will remain vassals. And again, the Ottoman Empire ends in 1922, a little more than 100 years ago. The Christians as dhimmi within the Ottoman Empire continue the trajectory under the Mamluk. They had to continue to pay the jizya, which is a tax for the people of the book. Christians were forced to pay a disproportionately higher tax than Muslims within the empire. Dhimmis were forbidden to try and convert Muslims to their religion. It was illegal to convert a Muslim to Christianity or a Muslim to Judaism. But dhimmis were encouraged through bribes and exemptions, like lighter taxes, to convert to Islam. The Ottomans would take a portion of male Christian children, specifically in the Balkans, to supply themselves with soldiers and administrators. The soldiers were then called janissaries, and they would be compelled to convert to Islam. And this maybe was one of the most painful aspects of this time period for Christians, as their sons being taken from them and converted, and then their sons would be sent back often as the soldiers to persecute them. The Ottomans forcibly converted Christians living in the frontier regions of Macedonia and the northern Bulgaria, particularly in the 16th and 17th centuries. This would have been the fringe of the empire, closest to the west. And those who refused were either executed or burned alive. Numerous saints are martyred at this time for refusing either to convert to Islam, or having converted, they repented and are martyred for returning to the church. One example is a saint of today, January 17th, the feast of St. Anthony the Great. It is also on January 17th, the feast of the holy new martyr George of Ionia. And I'll read from St. Nikolai Velimirovich's prologue of Ohrid, which is a collection of lives of saints. This is what St. Nikolai says about St. George, the new martyr George. George was an Albanian. Albania is south of modern-day Serbia and north of modern-day Greece, roughly, on the west side of the Balkan Peninsula. He was born in the village of Cherkli, Albania, a very impoverished farmer. His family was a farming family, but very impoverished, very poor. The Turks used force in attempting to persuade George to embrace Islam, but he remained steadfast in the Christian faith, for which he was hanged in Ionia on January 17, 1838. Even unto today, George is a great miracle worker and healer. So when you read the lives of saints, this type of event in this period is very common. I didn't have to go looking far to find one. The dhimmi had to wear distinct clothing or colors or shoes or head coverings to identify them of who they were in terms of their religion. The dhimmi were excluded from testifying in court as witnesses against a Muslim, and testimony of a Christian or a Jew was not considered as valid in the Muslim court as much as the testimony of a Muslim. So if you had two people contradicting each other, one was a Muslim, one was a Christian, by default, the Muslim would be trusted and the Christian would not. Marriages between non-Muslim men, meaning Christian or Jewish men, and Muslim women was forbidden under Sharia law. The refusal of a husband to convert to Islam resulted in a divorce and the wife gaining custody of the children. Special restrictions were imposed concerning the construction, renovation, and size of churches, Orthodox churches, as well as the bells and bell towers that churches would use, and even how loud the bells could sound, or if you could ring them at all. This was all during the Ottoman period. We have to, though, remind ourselves the Ottoman Empire doesn't exist anymore. the ancestors of those who were a part of the Ottoman Empire still live in different parts of the world, specifically in Turkey, and they themselves are not responsible for any of this. So it would be, in a sense, inappropriate to lay, in a sense, at the feet of people living today responsibility for any of these sorrowful things. But at the same time, you can't, in a sense, ignore the things that happened in history, whether that's in your own family or in the family of somebody else, right? But these things are important to understand because it also explains how we get to the current situation we're in today. But it's for the people of our own day, in a sense, to look at the past, to understand it, and then to decide, well, what do we do about it? What best can we do about it? So, but we can't, in a sense, lay blame for these things at anybody who's living today. The church itself was taxed. There was an ecclesiastical taxes, I should say, imposed upon the church, upon specifically the bishops. If you were going to become a bishop, you had to obtain permission from the Ottomans, in a sense, to be elected. And you had to pay a tax for your election. And then you had to pay a yearly tax to retain your position, whether you're the patriarch or the metropolitan, and so forth. And these were hefty payments. To pay the tax, the patriarchs had to tax the metropolitans, who had to then tax the parishes. And the metropolitans themselves had to also tax the parishes for their own tax that they had to pay. But anyone could approach the Sultan and with enough money suggest who should be the next patriarch, even if this current patriarch was in good health. And so corruption, or the turnover of bishops, is rather high in this time period. There are many patriarchs of Constantinople, particularly at this time, and metropolitans, because of this practice of, in a sense, you could pay off the Sultan for your choice of who yourself to become patriarch or metropolitan, or your son or your nephew or your cousin or your brother, right, to take that position. And this caused havoc, of course, in the church. Wealthy laypersons could therefore have great influence on the hierarchy of the church. In Constantinople, the group of wealthy laypeople that lived in the district of the city called the Phanar, where the patriarch also resided, gained great influence because they themselves were well off, and with their wealth could exert a lot of influence, which is this is not uncommon today. You can just look at not just church issues, but political issues, and the whole discussion of buying politicians and influence, right, is still a very common problem in our own country. But the Phanariots, in a sense, become this group of wealthy Greeks that had a lot of influence on the patriarchate. Sometimes for the good, sometimes for the bad, right? Because you could use the wealth to help, in a sense, your wealth to help, in a sense, maintain stability in the church. Because what would happen is some metropolitan would be defrocked for maybe a just reason, and then he would go to the Sultan and say, well, I'll pay you this much if you make me patriarch. And he's an immoral, corrupt man himself. And so the current patriarch has to, in a sense, match the price to retain his seat. And in a sense, the church would rally, raise the money, pay it, and keep their patriarch. So in a sense, you see how this could work, in a sense, to save the church or try to help the church, or to destroy it or damage it or gain power. And this happened over and over and over again. I'll give you an example here. We'll talk about him in a little bit. Cyril Lucaris, Patriarch of Constantinople, was patriarch in 1612. and then again in 1621 to 23, and then again 1623 to 1630, and then again 1630 to 1634, then again 1634 to 35, and then again 1637 to 38. Because somebody else came in and became patriarch for a time period, and then he was able to find the funds to regain his throne. So, the Ottomans, in a sense, didn't have any loyalty per se to Orthodoxy, and so tolerated Protestant and Catholic missionaries within their realm so long as they limited their proselytizing to Orthodox Christians. Because again, you couldn't legally convert a Muslim to Christianity, whether it's Protestant, Catholic, Orthodox form, whatever. But the Ottomans didn't have any problem with Protestants or Catholics coming into Ottoman Empire and converting Orthodox Christians to Catholicism or Protestantism. At the Council of Trent in 1542 to 1564, the Catholic Church made it a priority to missionize Orthodox in the Ottoman Empire and to establish Catholic hierarchs in the Orthodox lands. This is where the Jesuits, in a sense, get their mission, partly. They're part of the Counter-Reformation to go back and reconvert the Protestants, but not just them, but also to go and convert the Orthodox. Constantinople will intervene outside its jurisdiction, outside of the Patriarchate of Constantinople in Jerusalem and in Antioch, to repel the efforts of Catholic missionaries. And this will manifest itself in Greeks being patriarchs in Antioch and Jerusalem beginning in the 18th century. And we'll come back to this again when we talk about the emergence of the Melkite Church. But within the Middle East, you have, before this period, you have a group called the Maronites that existed at least some point in the 12th century, probably going back to the 7th century. And they had been an isolated group in the mountains of Lebanon since the 7th century and may have been what we call monothelite heretics. So the monothelite heresy was put forward by one of the emperors of Constantinople trying to resolve the conflict with the Coptic Church and the Monophysites, those who don't accept the Council of Chalcedon. And he put forward this teaching of the monothelite heresy to try to sway them back. And it's likely that the Maronites had embraced that, but they lived isolated in these isolated mountain valleys in Mount Lebanon from the 7th century onwards. And with the coming of the Crusades, the Crusaders, in a sense, come upon them. And in the 12th century, they in a sense, change their affiliation. They come under the Bishop of Rome. They themselves, over time, become heavily Latinized, following today not the Eastern Rite, but the Western Rite. And you have Maronites, of course, via immigration all throughout North America and the West. But this group existed from the time of the Crusades as a part of the Catholic Church. In 1573, you have a correspondence that's initiated by Lutherans with the Patriarch of Constantinople, Jeremias II. And this correspondence lasts from 1573 to 1581. It's conducted by the ambassadors from certain German principalities that had become Lutheran, that were ambassadors to the Ottoman Empire in Constantinople or in Istanbul. And they approach the Patriarch in a sense, looking for support of Lutheranism, their Lutheran ideas. And at first, Jeremiah II doesn't really respond. And they kind of press him. And they give him the Augsburg Confession of Augsburg. And again, they write, he doesn't answer. And finally, they press him, and he does respond and say, basically, we don't accept these ideas of yours. These, yes, we agree with this, but these we don't agree with. If you want to talk about that, we can talk about it. But what ends up happening is the Lutherans mainly are just looking for confirmation of what they've already done. They don't find it. The patriarch is not willing, in a sense, to compromise and kind of bless Lutheranism and say it's Orthodox, because there are points of disagreement, and the correspondence ends with the patriarch basically writing, saying, you can write to us, but don't write to us about theology. Write to us about friendship or how we're doing, or tell us how you are doing. And ask, that's fine, but don't continue to try to press us to accept your theological ideas. And it comes to naught. So this then takes us to the time of the early 1600s, back to the patriarch, Cyril Lucaris of Constantinople, who I went through all of the dates he was patriarch. He is purportedly to have authored a text called the Confession of Cyril Lucaris. This text is initially published in Latin at Geneva, Switzerland, which the red flag should go up immediately, right? Why is there the Patriarch of Constantinople publishing something in Latin in Geneva, which is Protestant, right? And the text itself was an 18-point summary of beliefs that conformed with Calvinist teaching. A Greek version called Eastern Confession of the Christian Faith appeared in Constantinople in 1633. The patriarch denied having written it, but still it was unclear who was the author. The Confession of Cyril Lucaris, as it was called, was condemned by the 1638 Synod of Constantinople, and then by the 1642 Synod of Jassy. So Cyril Lucaris is this kind of mysterious figure in some ways, because it's not clear exactly. It seems that he did have clear Protestant leanings or sympathies, likely. But it's not clear if he's the author of this. And so you see, in a sense, the Christians in the Ottoman Empire, right, are not only living under the pressure of the Ottoman Empire, but Protestants have come in and are trying to make converts amongst them. And this is one of the ways they tried to do that, specifically with the authorship of this confession. Diothesius II Notaras, Patriarch of Jerusalem between 1669 and 1707, he calls the Synod of Jerusalem in 1672 to address the confession of Cyril Lucaris, refuting it point by point. This is a very famous synod of the 1600s. The synod itself doubted the authorship of the confession by Patriarch Cyril. They were explaining many reasons why it's doubtful that he wrote it. The synod then affirmed the teaching role of the church and the tradition of the church against the Protestant teaching of sola scriptura. So in the question of when did the Orthodox start to refute, in a sense, the main Protestant doctrines, the loudest voice for this at this time is the Synod of Jerusalem in 1672. So sola scriptura is refuted. The Synod also affirmed the role of love and grace, and therefore of deeds, your actions having a part in your justification. So saved by faith only is being refuted. The synod affirmed the sacraments, being the mysteries of the church, and that they're not just merely symbolic or expressive. Moreover, the synod affirmed that Christ was truly present in the Eucharist. The synod also confirmed the canonicity of the deuterocanonical books of the Old Testament, the ones that the Protestants did not include in their Old Testament, but are present in the Greek version of the Old Testament called the Septuagint, which again precedes the existence of Christianity, because the Septuagint is the translation of the Old Testament from Hebrew into Greek, starts in 250 BC, 250 years before Christ. And so the church, when you read the New Testament and the authors of the New Testament books are quoting the Old Testament, they're quoting it not in Hebrew, but in Greek, in the Septuagint version. And the Septuagint version had a lot of more books than were written in Hebrew. But when the Protestant reformers came, they decided that they would not use the Septuagint or the Latin Vulgate, because the Latin Vulgate is also influenced by the Septuagint. They would only use what the Jews had, the rabbinic Jews of their day had in their Old Testament. That was in Hebrew. And that's how all of these books get left out, because they're following the rabbinic Jewish canon, not the Christian church canon. So the Synod of Jerusalem affirms in a sense, the Septuagint form of the Old Testament as opposed to the Hebrew. The Synod also rejected the thesis of unconditional predestination and of justification by faith alone. So the ideas of predestination that Luther picks up from the men who came before him, and then again, predestination is an idea that not just Luther, but Calvin and Zwingli, all of the very earliest reformers, they all embraced the idea of predestination. This is rejected by the council. Questions? Not much more to go. It's then in the start of the 18th century that we see another development in the Middle East in terms of Catholic efforts now to missionize. They already have the Maronites present, but Catholic missionaries are present throughout this time period trying to convert Orthodox and establish bishops or Catholic bishops in the Middle East. And this is something that had already been occurring in Eastern Europe, and was referred to as the Unia. In 1596, you have the Union of Brest-Litovsk. Brest-Litovsk is a city in, I don't know if it's Eastern Poland or Western Ukraine, but in that area, or Western Belarus. I don't remember exactly geographically where it is, but in that area, the city of Brest-Litovsk, there is in 1596, a union of the local bishops, which are under the authority of the Polish-Lithuanian kingdom, which is a Catholic kingdom. So Orthodox bishops who are within a Catholic kingdom come into union with Rome. And the only thing that has to change is that they have to commemorate the Bishop of Rome instead of their own bishop. They're allowed to keep, in a sense, the liturgical practice that they have, the celebration of the saints, married priests are all retained, but they just have to commemorate the Bishop of Rome. And this is what is the root of what becomes the Greek Catholic Church of Ukraine. which is the Protestant, kind of the modern day descendant of that first unia. The same basic idea then happens in Antioch in the 18th century. And this group is called the Melkites, the Melkite Greek Catholic Church. And in 1724, there was a conflict over who should be the next bishop of Antioch, next patriarch of Antioch. Cyril Tanis claimed the throne, and he was had Roman Catholic leanings. And so the Patriarch of Constantinople ordains the Hierodeacon Sylvester of Antioch as patriarch and defrocks Cyril. But this causes a schism. Those who want to follow Cyril and those who want to follow Sylvester of Antioch. In 1729, Pope Benedict XIII recognized Cyril Tanis as patriarch, thus founding the Melkite Greek Catholic Church. And this starts the schism then that will remain to this day in the Middle East between the Orthodox and now not just the Maronites, but also now the Melkites. And so you have, in a sense, three churches, or more actually, but historically, amongst Middle Eastern Christians, the Orthodox, the Maronites, and the Melkites. The Maronites are a larger group. Today they number over 3 million. The Melkites number a little over about 1.5 million in the world. The Patriarchate of Antioch, our patriarchate, in 2012, the number was 4.3 million, respectively. And so this, to this day, right, causes difficulties in the Middle East amongst Christians. We won't get into all of that so much as right now. We'll come back to this, of course, in a later lecture. But in terms of this, the state of Christianity in the Middle East, I'm going to read as a kind of final summary. I'm going to read to you the opening address by our Patriarch John X, sections of it, that he made to the International Scientific Conference that was entitled The Orthodox Church of Antioch from the 15th to the 18th Century Towards a Proper Understanding of History. This conference, international conference, was held in October of last year. And this is his opening address, speaking about this schism specifically. Was basically one of the major themes of this conference. But to do so, he first starts talking about just history in general. And so I'll read to you. Since our topic deals specifically with ecclesiastical history, it is our quest to redeem it, to correct the course anew, to heal wounds, and to reconcile every rift. However, what is evil is the changing of the reading of history according to the immediate self-interests, so that things are turned upside down and facts are taken as personal views. Yes, we deeply regret that some are comfortable with the post-truth era and consider this as a basis. For some, truth has become synonymous with what the masses believe, i.e., the product of sophistry and popularism, while historical facts are left to oblivion. In this post-truth era, and the blurriness associated with it, we need now more than ever for scientific research to reveal facts. Therefore, we want this scientific conference today to deal with a difficult period in the history of the Church of Antioch, the first church founded by the Apostle Peter, in which the disciples were first called Christians, Acts 11:26. And then he goes on. Antioch was not spared the repercussions of the Great Schism, and the struggle for power, and this part of the church turned into a land of conquest and capture. The schism deepened, so he's talking about the schism of 1054 now, took on existence in reality with the so-called Crusades that uprooted the Orthodox Antiochian patriarchs from their see and replaced them with Latin patriarchs. Despite the severe hardships and persecutions that befell us in the Mamluk era and other eras, the leaders of the Church of Antioch never lost sight of the fact that the only response to attempts at unity through coercion and material worldly temptations was total and complete devotion to the spirit of Orthodox conciliarity. Hence, Antioch's rejection of the Council of Ferrara-Florence in 1439, which was held on the verge of the fall of the Roman Empire. The years continued with their cruelty to Christians living in this tormented region of Antioch. With the advent of the Ottomans and the first attempts at Western colonization in the East, Rome sent missionaries to us, not to help persecuted Christians, but to entice them to join it, accompanied by promises of commercial and economic opportunities and political protections by the European powers. So those who became weak under such pressures joined it. This situation was not because of the accusations that some attached against the Antiochian clergy about the alleged neglect of the parish and the so-called lack of spiritual care for the faithful. So this was an accusation, in a sense, by Roman missionaries, that your bishops and priests aren't taking care of you, so we're coming to do that. The patriarchs of Antioch since the 17th century, such as Meletius Karma, 1634 to 1635, Macarius III Ibn Zayam, 1648 to 1672, and Athanasius III Dabas, 1686 to 1724, spared no effort to educate the parish, secure its needs, and preserve the Orthodox faith. Their efforts yielded a pastoral renaissance and cultural and spiritual renewal in the Church of Antioch. And he continues, no matter how much some try to obscure or distort the facts, they are not able to hide what has been achieved in many areas, including reviewing books, scientific and critical editing of texts, printing them in Arabic in printing presses, criteria for priest selection and for the election of bishops, educating priests in seminaries and theological schools, restoring many church buildings and icons, providing relief funds to needy families, opening schools for children's education, organizing spiritual courts and supervising their work, regulating marriage and personal status laws, and revitalizing monastic life and monasteries. This is all the things that he's saying were done by these patriarchs. Their labors were mixed with the sweat of perseverance, the tears of prayers, and the blood of martyrdom. They had a clear and correct vision of the ecclesiastical renaissance and how to establish the flock in the authentic Orthodox faith, despite the enormous pressure from inside and outside to destabilize church life and the confidence of the faithful in the church. And then I skip ahead. Fraternally, I leave it to those who departed from us and joined the West, meaning the Melkites, in accordance with an agreement that allowed them to preserve their rituals and maintain their patriarchal system, to evaluate the results of their choice, especially since this Balamand Hill witnessed, so this was held at the monastery of Balamand, which resides on a hill up above the Mediterranean Ocean in Lebanon. That's what he's referring to, the Balamand Hill. He says, not long ago, an Orthodox Catholic dialogue and church meeting, which occurred in 1993, which examined the feasibility of this uniatism as a way to achieve the desired unity between churches, and dropped it from consideration as a feasible way in the efforts for unity. Pope John Paul II, with his usual boldness, apologized in 2000 to the Eastern Orthodox Church for the mistakes made by the Church of Rome in the Middle Ages towards the Christians of the East that led to Christian fragmentation. So he says the fact that you have this idea of the unia, he says this was discussed between Orthodox and Catholics in 1993, and it was said that uniatism, in a sense, Catholics coming in and taking Orthodox peoples and just saying, you're under the Pope now, this is not the way to church unity. That this would not be something we, in a sense, approve of or will continue to promote. And that then Pope John Paul II apologized for all that then had been done in the past. And this is jumping again ahead. He says, "Beloved, history has been harsh on us in this region, and it continues to be harsh. But we are loyal to this land because it has been mixed with the soil of our fathers and with the blood of our saints. We are committed to bear love for all the inhabitants of this area with whom we were and still are partners in life and death, and mistreated like them by external forces. We are the children of this land, and we do not seek foreign protections in it, but we seek to translate the teachings of the gospel in this land. Let us convey the kindness and peace of Christ wherever we go. We are here to build this country on the values of love and decent morals with all good and sincere people. We are a loving bloc, not a sectarian bloc. We only aspire for the earth to be heaven and for history to be a history of God's loving kindness, compassion, and love for mankind, not the history of sin." So that gives you, in a sense, the vision of our current patriarch about all of the, in a sense, disastrous history that has come before us and how to deal with it. Again, in a sense, those who are the descendants of those groups of people aren't responsible for what their ancestors did, nor are we responsible for what our ancestors did. But the patriarch's call is that we have to then approach everyone as a loving bloc, not a sectarian bloc. Not that we are these sectarian groups, that we have to work together with those who are willing to work together for a stable and peaceful society. So, which he, being the Patriarch of Antioch, residing in Damascus, Syria, right, that gives you the context of what he's talking about. And the outside forces, right, he's not looking for outside help to come to Syria, but to let the Syrians rebuild themselves and the Lebanese to rebuild themselves. They're not looking for protection from outside. They're just wanting to be able to work with the people inside. So that's a whole, we'll come back to this, the current kind of context of things, the last lecture. But that gives you, I hope, a vision of what the church, what Christians in the Balkans, Turkey, Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, right? This is what they saw in their lives, 16th through the 18th century. So, questions? Let's see. We have 3 questions in the chat. 1, why believe on Christianity? The 2nd, Islam has every single proof. The 3rd, the Bible even contradicts. Those are the, I guess, statements by our guest. Thank you for your statements. And I would guess the summation of the answer would be because God so loved man that he sent his only begotten Son, that all should be saved and have eternal life. And his Son is the Word of God, Jesus Christ, who became man and died and rose again from the dead. Isa al-Masih, as they say in Arabic. And so because of the resurrection, that is the only proof we need. And that resurrection is alive in our own life, which is a life which connects heaven and earth now in this place, not waiting for some paradise that is supposed to come. So That's why I'm Christian, not Muslim. So I hope that answers. But thank you. God bless you all. We'll go on to the more of the 18th and 19th century next week.